welcome to Calumet Roundtable, a student-produced interview program. I am your host, Lee Artz. I'm joined by my guest today, Professor Jerry Harris. Jerry Harris is the National Secretary of the Global Studies Association. He's written widely on transnational capitalism and globalization, published in Science and Society, Race and Class, articles published in journals in German and Chinese, the author of The Dialectics of Globalization, Economic and Political Conflict in a Transnational World, and a book that's forthcoming that we want to talk about today, which is called Global Capitalism and the Crisis of Democracy. Welcome today, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Lee.
I've read excerpts from the book, which comes out in June, I understand, so I hope our viewers get a chance to see it. But one of the things that you address quite extensively in a couple of the chapters is the idea of green capitalism. Maybe you can explain to us. I mean, I understand there's a connection between the idea that technology and markets can solve the problems of the environment, and capitalism is the way to do that. But I thought you should tell us a little bit about what green capitalism is and where it came from.
Well, I think if you back up for the past 30 years or so, the dominant, I think, economic trend has been financialization, speculation, the mortgage crisis, and we know where this has led to in the worldwide recessions. So with global climate change becoming more and more evident to the point where it's impossible to deny it, I think a lot of the corporations have started to seriously deal with the question of transforming the economy towards sustainable technologies and looking towards those technologies, whether they're in energy or recycling or architecture or agriculture, as ways to rejuvenate the economy and to rejuvenate their profits.
So the reason it's called green capitalism is because it's supposed to be investment, development of technology to do sustainable, environmentally friendly production and consumption?
Absolutely, right.
Well, who advocates this at this point? Who's the primary architects or proponents of this?
Well, it's an interesting array of actors, I think. Of course, Al Gore has been a out front guy for many years, sort of the black sheep for many years, In the scientific community, of course, has been outspoken for a long time, like Jim Hansen from NASA. But in terms of corporate interests, I think we're seeing some really new players come into the field. So we have people advocating green capitalism like Hank Paulson, who was Secretary of Treasury under George W. Bush, former CEO of Goldman Sachs. Robert Rubin, who was Secretary of Treasury under Bill Clinton, also a Goldman Sachs alumni and now a CEO, not a CEO, but high official in Citibank. Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire mayor from New York. And many others. So I think we see some heavyweight hitters from the inner circles of the capitalist class speaking to this now and addressing it in a serious manner.
One of the things I read in the preview to your book was the UN says that they want to privatize ecology and financialize nature. And I'm a little confused because I thought part of the problem was privatizing natural resources like oil or coal,
right? And
the primary goal was to sell it for profits. So the idea that you're going to do this and somehow this is going to help save the environment, somehow it's not computing or working for me.
Yeah, well, I think the argument from their point of view is that it could lead to a new round of growth and accumulation or profit making, and so. Capitalism is always looking for new markets, always looking for new areas of growth, always looking for new investments. So here we have an immense field for new technologies and new investments and opportunities for profit making. If you think of replacing fossil fuels over the next 50 to 100 years, somebody's going to make a lot of money off of that. If you think of replacing a lot of the buildings, or at least new constructions, materials.
I would interrupt you because
Sure.
part of the argument from the environmentalists is that 50, 100 years from now, it may be too late to wean yourself from fossil fuels. So it's...
Well, I think in terms of environmental time, I think 50 to 100 years is very short, very rapid. And even from an economic viewpoint, I think a turnover of 50 years is rather rapid. Now, some people like Gore say that you could totally transform the American energy system within a decade by putting enough money into it, a couple $1 trillion.
What do you mean, go from
totally
gas
from
and oil to solar and
wind,
thermal?
100% conversion. Other scientists say you can do a worldwide conversion within 20 years with about 10% of the world's GDP per year. But that would take a political revolution as well as an economic revolution.
So can this be done headed by Exxon or Walmart? I mean, is this something that the green capitalists are advocating, or is it like Toyota's green campaign? I've got a nice little Previa for you and a green car, but I also have all these other cars. So is this part of the perspective, or is green capitalism and solar just one part of a larger portfolio of investments in all kinds of energy?
Right. I think for many of them, right now, it is simply a bet, an alternative bet. This stuff is coming on. We better be players in the field. So let's.
There's money to be made, so we'll go here.
Yeah, let's go here and start exploring it. For others, I think it's more serious and more deep. So that's one internal conflict, I think, that's there already. The pace, the amount of subsidies, what type of taxation do you have around this type of stuff? All these questions need to be played out. So I think there's a lot of complexity and also a lot of opportunity for progressives to affect the agenda and to come in with our alternative ideas, particularly around social justice. Because there's nothing in green capitalism that says you want to pay workers a better wage.
Yeah.
Nothing in green capitalism says, well, we'll establish a solar panel plant in Malaysia, but $1 an hour is a good wage, so that's what we'll pay.
I see this as many things when we use language to represent viewpoints or even to represent policies. We have these two, green and capitalism. And I understand the both. The idea that they can fit together somehow, again, doesn't compute. But in reading your chapter, it seems like there's at least individual environmentalists that seem to advocate this, either out of a pragmatic sense or... I was struck by Bill McKibben, who's historically an environmentalist that has participated to some extent in advocating, or at least tacitly giving his approval to green capitalism. Why would the environmentalists do this? Because there's no other option?
I think a lot of them don't see any option beyond the market. I mean, the market has been so dominant culturally and ideologically that for many people, it's hard to see beyond it. So any type of alternative that you're going to propose is proposed within the confines of that logic. So that's one of the tasks, I think, for the progressive community and people like McKibben, as a matter of fact, to start thinking outside of that box. Within it, but also outside of it. Because we're talking about a transformational period, you're not going to do this in a 1 or 5 or 10-year revolution.
Except that you said it could be done in 10 years if the political will was there. So that was one of the contradictions I noted in in the chapter that I read. I mean, it was filled with many details, some of which maybe we can talk about after we take a short break about who are some of the players. But one of the things that struck me was this contradiction of the market being the driver of solving climate change, which is largely the result of a market that has both exploited and burned the fuel that's created the problems, and somehow, well, at a certain point we'll create a new technology, we'll all get rich, and then we'll still have clean air. And I mean, 40%, one of the things I read, 40% of the Rockefeller's Foundation grants go to alternative energy.
Yeah.
So it's like Rockefeller.
Yeah, Rockefeller.
Standard Oil wants to invest in solar energy. So it just strikes me as it's a huge contradiction.
I think there's two underlying problems for green capitalism that they face, and they're both lie within the very kernel of logic of capitalism in both the expansionary cycle as well as the recessionary cycle. So anyone who's familiar with the history of capitalism, we know that there's periods of growth and periods of recession.
But the tendency is to always expand.
Yeah.
I mean, globally.
Yeah, the tendency is
new markets, new resources.
Which is the whole force behind globalization. So the problem with the expansion, of course, is that it always calls for new land use, new resources, new energy, more labor, more roads, more ports, more. Like George Carlin used to say, more stuff. And the recessionary problem is that you have a shutdown and a failure and a bankruptcy of many of the green corporations that are sprouting up.
So solar was something that came when the market was high, there was subsidy for it. I think I read in the book that Germany, I don't know what the number was, a good share of their national energy is from solar. But as the recession goes and the profits can't be made, there's a withdrawal of support from the market for solar. Whereas just when people are getting used to using solar, putting panels on their roof, you may not have that option because investors and producers have not seen it as a primary way of making profits. So the cycle of capital, is there a green cycle? I mean, does a green cycle attenuate the dips and
This is the problem with the recessionary cycle. One is that the Chinese expanded production massively within a very short period of time, and it brought down prices to make it affordable. Bringing down prices caused a crisis of profitability for many corporations.
Because you don't make a profit unless you can sell the goods, and if the goods are sold at less than what you produced them, you're starting to lose money.
Exactly.
So, well, there were three things when you talked about what green capitalism does for capitalism, and I'd like to get to that. But right now, we're going to take a quick break. This is the Calumet Roundtable, and we'll be back in a minute.
Very good.
Welcome back to Calumet Roundtable, our student-produced interviewing television program. I'm your host, Lee Artz, and today my guest is Jerry Harris. He's the author of Global Capitalism and the Crisis of Democracy that's due out in just a few months. And I do want to get to the second part of the title of the book, The Crisis of Democracy, what you describe as legitimacy. But in the book, you suggested that green capitalism does three things for the transnational capitalist market community. One, we've talked a little bit about accumulation, how you can make profits hedging your bets. A second one is a question of defense, which suggests that climate change is more than an environmental or strictly a biological question, that there's a political consequence. And I think of water in Bolivia and the political crisis. Would you talk a little bit about what you mean by green capitalism and how it solves their problem of defense?
Well, both social and political crisis there. It's interesting, both the CIA and the Pentagon have, for at least a decade, if not more, have been doing studies on the political instability and social instability that results from global climate change, warming, shortages of water as well as floods, massive immigration as, for example, Bangladesh or coastal areas are lost.
So I read in your book that 137 million people would not have a home if the temperature goes up by 1 degree because the sea level rises. So you have 137. Is that what you mean by political consequences?
Yeah, because of all the coastal cities around the world. I mean, you think almost all the great cities in the world are coastal cities, at least a great many of them. And of course, there the burden falls on the poorest people in the poorest countries the most. So if we think we have a political, social crisis of refugees today coming out of Syria and Iraq, which are coming into Europe, we can just imagine what...
100 times that.
Yeah, 100 times that. And so this is what the Pentagon and the CIA have been talking about, and the fear of possible social revolution. And I think we've already had one indication of this in Bolivia, where when Bechtel bought up the water rights in Cochabamba, there was a massive social rebellion that led to them actually being kicked out of the country.
Bechtel, not...
Bechtel being kicked out of the country. And eventually the election of socialist Evo Morales to...
So how does green capitalism solve that problem?
Well, their hope is that they could mediate that global warming crisis. That I don't think they believe they can stop it totally, but that they can mediate it to the extent that it won't be as severe. And so they can maintain social stability, which means that you have a more stable environment for production and investments and profitability. So I think so it's interesting that you would think, many people think of the Pentagon as the most right-wing or sort of reactionary think tank
well, no, if you're interested in where are the possible political or military hotspots, one of them you might notice is if people don't have water, there's going to be a rebellion, so you might need troops there. So, and we don't have enough troops, we're going to stop the rebellion. Well, how do you do that? You get water. How do you do that with some technology? What technology? I mean, I can see it kind of weaving back to, well, we have to be more conscious about using technology for its social impact. So it's got, but I still don't, I guess I don't see the connection between that and what they think green capitalism will do, which means more investment in solar energy or more investment in public water systems. Is that?
Yeah, certainly,
Not to solve the problem, but to mitigate it?
Well, I don't know if they believe that it could be totally solved or simply mitigated, but they recognize this as a major problem, even to the extent that they write about that government-run water services are just as efficient as privately owned, and one of the dangers
well, that's not something the Koch brothers would say.
Right. And they even say that one of the dangers is that when people perceive water prices going up because of the privatization of water, so they actually see that as a danger. So
that's a real-life experience that undercuts the claims of green capitalism, because we've privatized it, but the water prices are going up, or like in Flint where they privatized it, and now we have rotten water, so it creates a contradiction. Okay, I understand that. The last thing, and I want to try to get to all of these, I realize it's a whole book and we've only got 30 minutes to talk, but you talk about the question of legitimacy, which is the politics of green capitalism that makes possible the general public seeing the common sense of relying upon business or technology to solve our problems. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, I think one of the great problems that governments are facing, not only in the United States, but certainly in Europe and some other countries, is delegitimization. In other words, people no longer believe in the honesty of the government, that government action could be effective, et cetera. Corruption in government. Certainly we see that here in both the campaigns of Trump and Bernie Sanders. So for political systems to retain viability, they need to be viewed as legitimate, yes, right, by the population. Yep. So if financialization and speculation and corruption that has come with it has caused this great cynicism and rejection of the current political parties, how do you renew that political legitimacy? So you have to come up with a new philosophy or a new narrative, certainly. And if the government can then, or political parties can be associated with saving the planet and saving species and providing new green jobs and renewing a cycle of growth.
You reestablish your legitimacy for a project that wins public support.
That's right. And also that you can encompass within your coalition a lot of the oppositional groups. So you start to encompass people like Bill McKibben and the environmentalists, and you say, well, join our administration or work with our administration to...
We'll do clean fracking.
Well, probably not that, but certainly that, we'll put you in charge of reconstructing the water system in Flint, yep, or handing out subsidies and overseeing solar power production.
I'm reminded of British Petroleum, BP. Even though 99% or 97% is oil, they changed their slogan to be Beyond Petroleum, yes, BP, and they had a whole worldwide campaign on how they were supporting solar and renewable energy. Yeah. So they didn't actually have to do it. They had to present the image that they were doing that. So is that what you're talking about, green capitalism used as an attempt to
not really
establish legitimacy?
I think that's greenwashing, and there's been quite a lot of that,
Good,
right?
The distinction between greenwashing and green capitalism.
Right.
Okay.
So this is actually a serious attempt by growing sectors of the capitalist class to actually deal with a real crisis that they understand and accept scientifically. And from their point of view, from the box that they operate out of, how can they use the market and government?
From the belief that the market is the only way to organize the world, doesn't
Absolutely.
Deny that there's climate change, so you try to turn your ideology into a solution to a problem that can't be ignored.
And actually, if you think about the last 240 years of capitalism in the United States, have rather been successful in doing this type of stuff.
You say in the book, and now I've got another contradiction here, or maybe not, that the transnational capitalist class, you said, has $600 trillion that they're holding on to with no place to invest.
Yeah.
Well, if green capitalism says let's have solar energy or wind or thermal, why don't they take the $600 trillion and invest in solar energy?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't me who said 600, it was Bain.
Oh, yeah,
Capital,
Bain Capital.
Actually,
they probably have more insight to that.
Yeah, than me. They would have the data. And of course, Bain was Mitt Romney's hedge fund. Yep. So I think this is one of, as you point out, one of the great contradictions of the capitalist system is they don't see a market where they could turn profits in this quarter or in this year. They're very slow to invest. And that's part of the argument and disagreements, I think, that we're seeing come to play here of how much pressure and when can this be achieved and what role is government going to play here. And for example, Gore said he wouldn't run for president again because he didn't think the country was ready for a serious green agenda. Yeah. That's a couple of years ago he said this. And I think that's reflected in this $600 trillion with no place to go. Where others are saying, wait a minute, there's a lot of place for this to go. Yes. But then how soon can these profits be realized? How soon can these technologies be rolled out? What types of tax legislation will they get? What type of political support will be there? What type of political opposition? So all that slows the process down.
It sounds to me like there's another contradiction that I'd like you to speak to, and you mentioned a little bit in the one chapter on green capitalism that I read, is that how can you have sustainability with growth? So if the answer to that is you can't have sustainability because growth just eats up what is a finite planet, then the question is, how can you have a society that doesn't have growth? How can you have development that doesn't include growth? Because you have a world that's socially unequal. People don't have houses, they don't have food, they don't have health care. All of those things have to be produced. That's growth. So how can you have sustainability or development without growth?
Well, there's a number of, I think, levels to that question. One is the redistribution of wealth around the world. Not that everyone could live an American middle-class lifestyle. For that, you would need another 3.5 planets, actually, to do that for everybody. But can everybody have decent housing and health care and good education and a decent diet and good public transportation? So that, I think, is achievable. The argument around green growth is that it's growth without using up more resources. It's actually growth without that. So you replace fossil fuels with renewables, right? That's growth, but it's with renewables. So you, and that goes through the entire economy at every level. That you use less resources, less materials to rebuild housing. No fossil fuel in agriculture, organic agriculture, right?
We will have to have you back for another one. I mean, I'm a communication scholar, so I'm always interested in the question of language, and I have a problem with using the language of the market as a means. And I understand what you're saying about growth, and I could see that as development, but isn't necessarily growth.
Absolutely.
Because we don't all need a new refrigerator, a new dryer, a new car, but you can still have development that may not mean that kind of growth. So.
And that development doesn't have to be market development. It can be beyond the market.
Well, I would just encourage all of our viewers to get your book, which comes out in June, Global Capitalism and the Crisis of Democracy, and then please contact Purdue University, and maybe we can continue this conversation in another venue. But that's all the time we have today on our program. So thank you for joining me on the Calumet Roundtable. I'm Lee Artz, your host, and my guest today was Jerry Harris. Thank you for coming, Jerry. Have a great day.
Thank you.